June 6, 1944. Somewhere above Normandy, France, inside a Halifax bomber fighting for its life. The aircraft shook like a wounded animal as flak bursts hammered the night sky. Metal rattled, loose kit clattered across the floor. Sweat, cordite and engine fumes thickened the air until every breath tasted of war. The men of the 13th Lancashire Parachute Battalion stood in two tight ranks, helmets lowered, chins set, eyes fixed on the red jump light glowing over the open door. They looked like statues, but their hands betrayed them. Fingers flexed, knees bounced. Boots shifted with restless energy born from fear, discipline, and the knowledge that every second brought them closer to the drop. Between two paratroopers sat a dog, not a mascot, not a pet. A trained British war dog, designation Dog 2508, though the battalion had given him a more human name, Bing. An Alsatian Collie cross with steady eyes and the calm posture of a veteran, Bing wore a specially modified parachute harness that wrapped tightly around his chest and flanks. The straps were padded, the rigging handmade by the War Dogs training school in Essex, because nothing like it had ever been used in combat before. A paradog, dropping into Normandy. Bing didn't tremble, didn't bark, didn't flinch as another flak burst slapped the fuselage hard enough to make two men stumble. Instead, he looked toward the open door, ears pitched forward, listening to the howl of wind and distant gunfire rolling up from the French coast. Private Kenneth Bailey, Bing's handler, knelt beside him. Even through gloves, Bailey's hands shook as he double-checked the clips, fasteners, and release lines. "Good lad," he whispered, voice thin over the engine roar. "You stay with me, just like we trained." Bailey's fear wasn't for himself. It was for the dog who trusted him enough to leap into the unknown. The Halifax lurched violently, one engine coughing as flak shredded the air inches from the wing. Men grabbed the overhead cable, boots skidding on the metal floor. Someone cursed, someone else crossed themselves. The jumpmaster slammed a hand on the frame and shouted, "Stand up! Hook up!" Static lines clipped onto the overhead cable in a hard metallic rhythm. Packs tightened, rifles swung, silk parachutes unfurled with sharp rustles. Bailey hooked Bing's rig into the special line designed for animals, carefully, quickly, without letting the tension in his chest show. On the dog's back, a small chute was folded so precisely that the instructors demanded perfection every time. If the chute failed, Bing would not survive the fall. The red light over the door flickered as another flak burst illuminated the night. The men closest to the opening saw the ground for the first time. Fields, flooded plains, fires burning where the first airborne pathfinders had landed, or crashed. Then, green. The jumpmaster roared, "Go! Go! Go!" One by one the paratroopers vanished into the blackness, swallowed by wind and gunfire. Each man disappeared like a ghost breaking free of the world. Bailey stepped toward the door with Bing. The dog's tail lowered, not in fear, but focus. He looked once at Bailey, steady, trusting, and leaned forward into the wind. Bailey whispered, almost pleading, "Please, open clean." And then Bing jumped. He dropped into the roaring void, harness whipping, wind tearing at him, until the small parachute snapped open above his body with a violent crack that echoed through the orchard-strewn night below. The dog descended alone, drifting into a battlefield he could not understand but had been trained to endure. Far beneath him, German sentries ran toward the flashes of incoming aircraft. Tracer fire clawed upward. Explosions rolled across the coast. Paratroopers landed scattered, disoriented, some drowning in flooded fields, others tangled in trees, others fighting the moment their boots hit French soil. Bing was falling into the largest invasion in human history. He had been mocked by some, doubted by others. But in the months ahead, he would prove himself in ways no one expected. He would detect hidden dangers that men missed. He would save soldiers from stumbling into German ambushes. He would become a silent guardian in the hedgerows of Normandy. And it all began with a single leap into darkness. Bing's parachute dragged him sideways as he neared the ground, the canopy catching a gust that spun his descent toward a line of dark, tangled trees. The orchards of Normandy rose beneath him, rows of apple and pear trees shaped like black skeletons in the half-light. He struck the upper branches with a thud, the harness jolting tight across his ribs. Leaves scraped his muzzle. Branches snapped under his weight. Then everything stopped. The chute snagged. Bing hung suspended, paws dangling a metre above the ground, body swaying gently in the cold night breeze. His instincts pushed him to struggle, but his training held. The War Dog School had drilled this scenario over and over: stay calm, conserve energy, wait for retrieval. Somewhere nearby, distant thumps rolled through the hedgerows, German mortars probing the night. Gunfire crackled in uneven bursts. The invasion was unfolding chaotically across the countryside, and no one was where they were supposed to be. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. At first quiet, cautious, then closer, crunching through grass and broken branches. "Hold on, boy. I'm coming, lad. Just hold on." The faint voice cut through the darkness like a lifeline. Private Kenneth Bailey emerged from the shadows, helmet askew, chute trailing behind him like a torn ghost. He had landed 2 orchards over, hit the ground hard, and sprinted the moment he heard a dog's faint whimper carried on the wind. "Bing!" he hissed urgently. "Steady! I've got you!" He reached up and unbuckled the smallest strap first, exactly as he'd been trained. The worst danger in a tree landing wasn't the fall. It was the chute collapsing on top of the dog, pinning him, suffocating him. Bailey gripped the harness with one hand and cut the tangled risers with the other, lowering Bing gently until his paws touched the soil. The dog shook once, dust, leaves and tension flying off him, then immediately pressed his body against Bailey's leg, tail low, ears forward, waiting for the next command. "Good lad! Bloody good lad!" A burst of machine gun fire erupted to the west. Tracers flicked through the spaces between trees. Both man and dog froze, listening. The battalion was scattered badly. Men dropped miles off target, some trapped in flooded marshes, others landing in areas crawling with German patrols. Bailey crouched and tapped Bing's harness. "Track, stay close." The dog moved to heel, nose low, weaving through grass and fallen fruit. His breathing steady, his posture sharp and alert. They weren't searching for a fight, they were searching for their unit. The hedgerows loomed around them like dark walls. Normandy's bocage was unlike anything the War Office instructors had been able to replicate in Essex. Dense earth mounds, thick shrubs, deep shadows, perfect ground for ambushes, snipers and traps. And perfect for a trained war dog. Bing paused suddenly. His ears flicked, his head rose. He stared toward a patch of darkness deeper than the others. Bailey froze, following the dog's line of sight. Nothing moved, no voices, no footsteps, just wind whispering across leaves. But Bing's body was rigid, muscles locked, the fur along his spine lifting slightly. "Easy, lad. What is it?" Bing inhaled once, deep, controlled, then gave a silent signal taught in training. A single step backward toward Bailey. It meant enemy nearby, not immediate, concealed. Bailey's pulse thudded in his ears. He lowered himself behind a thick root and lifted his Sten gun, eyes scanning the darkness. Then he saw it. A faint glimmer, moonlight catching on metal. A German soldier crouched behind a hedgerow, rifle pointed toward the orchard, watching for paratroopers. The man hadn't seen them, but Bing had sensed him. Bailey silently pulled Bing down beside him. Good lad! Good lad! Voices emerged, more than one. Soft, clipped German, a patrol, 2. No, 3 men. Moving parallel, searching for airborne troops. Bing remained perfectly still, not a sound leaving his throat, his body pressed to the earth. This was no accident. This discipline was earned through months of controlled stress conditioning, loud gunfire drills, scent tracking, and concealment exercises. Bailey's options were limited. A firefight here would draw half the region. His platoon was nowhere nearby. They needed to slip past unseen or die alone in an orchard. Bing made a small, deliberate movement, barely noticeable. His shoulder pressed gently against Bailey's boot, guiding his handler's attention behind them. Their path out, a gap in the hedgerow he hadn't spotted. Bailey swallowed hard and nodded. The dog already understood. Together they slid backward into the darkness, moving silently, avoiding broken branches, avoiding dry leaves, avoiding every natural tripwire the earth offered. Bailey followed Bing's lead more than his own instincts. Once through the gap, they took shelter in a sunken lane, a narrow dirt track framed by high hedges. The night air felt colder, quieter, farther from danger. Only then did Bailey exhale. "You saved our skins there, mate." Bing pressed against him softly, tail flicking once. Far in the orchards behind them, the German patrol passed by, unaware of how close they had come to 2 silhouettes in the dark. Bailey scratched behind Bing's ear, his voice barely a whisper. "That's it, lad. That's why you're here. Let's find the others." The dog lifted his head, nose shifting with the wind, catching faint, familiar scents. British cloth, gun oil, sweat, parachute silk. He turned north, and without hesitation, Bailey followed his dog into the night. The sunken lane carried them deeper into the bocage, twisting like a natural trench carved by centuries of farm carts and rainwater. The embankments rose shoulder-high on both sides, tangled with bramble, nettles and roots so thick they resembled knotted ropes. Bailey moved carefully, scanning the shadows, but in truth he trusted the dog more than his own eyes. Bing walked a half-step ahead, body low, ears rotating to catch every distant sound. Normandy was waking. A faint grey light crept into the sky. Roosters crowed from ruined farmhouses. Somewhere far off, a single artillery round cracked through the morning calm. D-Day was no longer an airborne drop. It was now a full-scale invasion grinding inland. Bailey stopped as Bing lifted his head sharply and inhaled, long and deliberate. British scent, faint but recent. "Have you got something, lad?" Bing turned right, toward a break in the hedge that Bailey would have walked straight past. The dog eased forward, pushing between branches, and Bailey followed, emerging into a small field littered with parachutes twisted across shrubs like patches of ghostly cloth. 2 figures crouched near the far hedge, rifles in hand. British helmets, British webbing, parachute battalion smocks. Bailey lifted a hand and whispered sharply, "Friendlies! 13th!" The men jerked around, rifles rising for a split second before recognition softened their posture. "Jesus, Bailey," hissed Corporal James Gardner, lowering his sten. "You gave us a bloody fright." "And you're a sight for sore eyes," Bailey answered. Bing trotted ahead, tail raised slightly, not wagging but alert and confident. Gardner reached down and scratched his flank. "Good boy, Bing. We thought you two were done for." Bailey exhaled for the first time in minutes. "We ran into a German patrol in the orchards. He spotted them before I did." One of the paratroopers, Private Holloway, whistled low. "Already earning his keep, eh?" Gardner nodded toward the tree line. "We're still scattered. Haven't regrouped with Major Ross yet. The DZ was a bloody mess. Half the battalion's miles off target." Bailey clipped Bing to his short lead. He can help us find more of our boys. He's tracking scents all over the place." Gardner gave a short, grim smile. "Then he's worth 10 compasses right now." The small group moved cautiously back into the hedgerows, Byng guiding them with sharp, purposeful movements. He paused at intersections, sniffing, picking the stronger direction each time. Sometimes they heard distant rifle cracks, isolated engagements by other lost paratroopers. Sometimes they heard German shouts drifting through lanes connecting farmhouses, but Byng always steered them away from danger. Near a stone wall covered in moss, Byng stopped abruptly and stared into a pile of parachute silk collapsed against the rocks. His body stiffened. Bailey tensed. "Easy, lad. What is it?" They approached slowly, and found Lieutenant Peter Gilman lying on his side, one leg twisted unnaturally, face pale with pain. His parachute lines were wrapped around his ankle like a constricting rope. "Sir!" Gardner rushed forward. "We thought you hadn't made it." Gilman tried to sit up, gritting his teeth. "Landed awkwardly. I've been shouting for help for half an hour. Glad someone heard me." Bailey glanced at Byng. "He wasn't shouting, sir. Byng sniffed you out." Gilman managed a pained smile. "Good dog. Well done." With careful hands, they freed the tangled chute and splinted the lieutenant's leg using 2 broken rifle stocks. While they worked, Byng sat at his side, occasionally leaning in to sniff his face, checking for shock, something he had also been trained to detect. Gilman caught his breath. "We need to find Major Ross and link back with the rest of the battalion. Company strength is all over the countryside." Gardner nodded. "We'll get you there, sir." Bailey secured Byng's harness once more and tapped lightly on the dog's shoulder. "Track." Byng resumed his steady, deliberate pace, guiding them through the maze of Normandy's farmland. They moved past burned-out haystacks, shattered wooden carts, and irrigation ditches swollen with floodwater. Each sign told the same story. Chaos. The airborne drop had scattered the British units like seeds tossed into the wind, but Byng kept them on course. A distant burst of Bren gunfire echoed over a hedgerow. More British. Close. Gardner crouched low. "Over that bank. Move." They followed Byng up a small incline and emerged onto a dirt track where a cluster of paratroopers held a defensive perimeter around a crossroads. Helmets turned. Relief washed across tired faces. Sergeant Tommy Grant waved them in. "Bailey, Gardner, you're alive, and you've brought Gilman too. Bloody miracle." Byng stood at Bailey's side, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, eyes watchful. Grant knelt and ruffled the dog's fur. "Good lad, Byng. You've done more for us today than half the Pathfinder teams." "Where's Major Ross?" Bailey asked. Grant jerked a thumb toward an ivy-covered farmhouse. "Inside, setting up the rally point. We've got maybe a quarter of the battalion accounted for." A quarter. Hours into the invasion, and they were fighting as fragments. Bailey inhaled slowly. "We'll get the rest. Byng's already found 3 groups." Grant smirked. "Well then, let's put him to work." As Byng led them toward the farmhouse, Bailey realized the truth. The battalion wasn't following maps or compasses anymore. It wasn't following the scattered officers or the unreliable radio signals. It was following a dog who had dropped into Normandy under fire and navigated the hedgerows with a sense no man could match. A dog who was already proving essential, and the hardest part of the day hadn't even begun. The farmhouse serving as the battalion rally point was a battered 2-story structure with shattered windows and a roof pockmarked by shrapnel. Its courtyard was littered with discarded parachutes, empty ammunition crates, and medical satchels hastily opened. Exhausted paratroopers filtered in from every direction, some with torn smocks, others missing equipment, all carrying the same hard expression of men who had dropped into darkness and survived. Major John Ross, commander of the 13th C Company, stood at a wooden table inside the farmhouse kitchen. A map was spread across cracked tiles stained with years of soot and now fresh mud. Candlelight fluttered against the walls, casting long shadows across helmets, rifles, and tense faces. Bailey entered with Byng at his side, Gardner and the others following behind with Lieutenant Gilman supported between them. Ross looked up sharply. "Bailey! Gardner! Good! You're in! Any sign of the rest of your stick?" "Scattered, sir," Gardner replied, "but we found 3 groups. Byng tracked them out." Ross's hard expression softened just enough to show that the news mattered. "This dog of yours is earning a reputation fast." "He saved us from a German patrol," Bailey said modestly. "Spotted them before we did." Ross gave a single nod. "Then he's part of the intelligence effort from this point onward." Byng sat calmly, tail brushing lightly against the dusty floor, ears turning toward every sound. Footsteps outside, distant explosions, shifting boots behind him. His composure drew glances from several men. Some had laughed at the idea of a war dog back in England. No one was laughing now. A runner burst into the farmhouse. "Sir, scouts spotted a German position blocking the route to Ranville. Machine guns, possibly a small strongpoint." Ross bent over the map. "If we don't break through, we'll lose the window to join the brigade." Bailey's stomach tightened. Fighting their way toward Ranville through prepared German defences would be bloody, and they were still missing half their strength. Ross looked up. "Gardner, Grant, form a forward scout team. Bailey, you're with them, and bring the dog." Bailey rested a hand on Byng's harness. "Yes, sir." Within minutes, the small team moved into the hedgerows east of the farmhouse. The morning light was rising quickly now, revealing more of the terrain, but also making concealment harder. Byng walked ahead, slightly to the left of Bailey, nose sweeping the air in deliberate arcs. Gardner whispered, "If we're lucky, the Germans don't know how scattered we really are." Bailey shook his head. "They'll know soon enough." Byng stopped suddenly. His head lifted, ears pricked forward, body stiff, not the alert from earlier, not curiosity. This was the posture he'd been trained to take only when he detected movement. Movement close. Grant crouched. "He's got something." Bailey lowered himself beside Byng. "Show me, lad." The dog's gaze shifted toward a thick hedgerow forming the perimeter of a small French field. The greenery was dense, 3 meters tall in places, with ancient roots forming a natural barrier. Even a trained soldier would miss any sign of danger unless he was nearly on top of it. But Byng knew. He pressed his nose forward, inhaled once, then slowly lowered his body until his elbows touched the dirt. The signal meant one thing: enemy ahead, concealed, stationary. Grant tightened his grip on his sten. "How far?" Bailey whispered. "Less than 15 yards." Gardner motioned for silence. The team eased forward, letting the dog guide their pace. Byng moved low, slow, almost sliding across the earth, then stopped just short of the hedge. He flicked his ears twice. Another signal. "2?" Bailey interpreted quietly. Byng remained focused. Gardner tiptoed to the hedge, parted a small opening, and looked through. He froze. 2 German machine gunners sat behind a camouflaged MG-34, mounted on a wooden rest facing the laneway their battalion route required. Ammunition belts looped across the dirt. Their field of fire covered the only open approach to Ranville. Any British unit passing through would be shredded. Gardner exhaled slowly. "Jesus, we would have walked right into that." Grant nodded grimly. "And they're waiting for the rest of us." Bailey gazed at Byng. The dog had sensed them long before any man could have. Even for trained airborne scouts, this hedge position would have been nearly invisible. Ross needed this information immediately. Gardner whispered, "Bailey, get Bing and fall back. Grant and I will mark a safer approach." They withdrew carefully through the hedgerows, moving the way they'd come, silent, deliberate, low to the ground. Only once they were nearly back at the farmhouse did Bing's body relax. Inside, Ross listened without interrupting. "Camouflaged MG-34, two-man crew," Gardner reported. "Overwatching the lane. They'll cut down anyone moving east." Ross rubbed his chin. If they're holding that lane, they're either expecting trouble or reporting positions. Bailey stepped forward. "Sir, Bing found them before we knew they were there." Ross looked down at the dog. For a moment his stern expression softened into something like respect. "Good work," he said quietly. "If your dog hadn't spotted them, we'd have walked half a company straight into a killing field." He studied the map again. "We'll flank north through the orchards, slower but safer. And Bailey, keep Bing forward. If there are more outposts, I want to know before we lose men." Bailey nodded. "Yes, sir." As Ross moved to pass orders to the platoon leaders, Sergeant Grant clapped Bailey on the shoulder. "Your dog just saved 30 men today." Gardner added with a thin smile, "I take back every joke I made about that parachute harness." Bailey looked down. Bing sat beside him, straight-backed, head high, eyes alert. A soldier in every way that mattered. And the day was still young. By late morning, the hedgerows glowed green under the strengthening daylight. Sunbeams cut through breaks in the foliage, casting shifting patterns across the earth as the paratroopers advanced in staggered groups. The battalion was finally knitting itself back together, not whole, but strong enough to move as a fighting unit rather than isolated clusters. Major Ross led from the front, navigating the narrow lane that curved away from the German machine gun nest Bing had uncovered. He trusted the dog's warnings now as much as the reports from his NCOs. The men followed in a loose column formation, rifles ready, boots silent against the soft Normandy soil. Bing padded ahead, Bailey keeping a light grip on the short lead. The dog wasn't pulling nor wandering. He worked. Every step was deliberate. Nose low, ears shifting, muscles taut beneath his harness. The battlefield presented 1,000 confusing scents. Cordite from distant gunfire, wet soil churned by boots and wheels, livestock fleeing burned farms, the sharp chemicals of medical kits and fuel spills. But Bing's job wasn't to identify everything. It was to find the one thing that shouldn't be there. Enemy scent. Human stillness. Something wrong. And eventually, he found it. They reached a junction where the hedgerows opened into a larger orchard. Apple trees stood in uneven lines, their trunks leaning like old men exhausted by years of storms. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and churned mud from earlier patrols. Bing stopped dead. Head up, nostrils flaring, ears forward. Bailey whispered, "Something there?" The dog didn't move. He stood frozen, an arrow pointing the way. Ross signalled the column to halt. "What's he got?" Before Bailey could answer, Bing shifted his stance, forepaws spread slightly, body lowering, tail stiffened parallel to the ground. The signal was unmistakable enemy, stationary, close, concealed, but not prepared to fire. Ross whispered, "Are they watching us?" Bailey shook his head. If they were ready, Bing would crouch lower. He smells them, but they're hiding. Gardner eased forward, staying within cover. "Let's scout it." Ross raised a hand. "Negative. We'll use the dog. Bailey, slow advance." Bailey nodded and released a few inches of lead. Bing moved silently, angling toward a cluster of 3 apple trees whose branches had collapsed into a tangled canopy. The shadows there were darker than the rest of the orchard, a perfect hiding spot. Bing stopped again, right at the edge of the shadow line. His muscles stiffened, his breath slowed, his head tilted. Bailey whispered, "He's got exact positioning now." Ross moved closer, staying low. "How many?" Bing inhaled once, then sharply exhaled through his nostrils, a trained battlefield signal for multiple human scents in close proximity. Gardner mouthed silently, "More than one." Ross pointed at 2 men. "Flank around, move slow, keep eyes on." As they spread out, Bailey held Bing back. The dog wanted to move forward, not to attack, but to keep detecting. Bailey rested a hand on the dog's flank. "Easy, lad. Stay." A faint rustle, then a muffled cough from inside the dark cluster of branches. Gardner tensed. "There, I heard it." Ross whispered, "Call out." Before he could, the German voices came, shaky, tense, very young. "Nicht schießen! Nicht schießen!" Bailey blinked. "They're surrendering." Gardner swept in first, Sten raised. "Hands up, Hände hoch!" 3 German soldiers emerged slowly, no helmets, no rifles in hand. One limped, bandaged around the thigh. Another had a blood-soaked sleeve. Their uniforms were muddied, torn, marked not by battle readiness but by retreat. They were cut off, lost, terrified. Bing had sensed them long before anyone else even suspected their presence. Grant joined the perimeter. "They look barely older than schoolboys." Ross studied them sharply. "Medics will check them, strip them of weapons, move them to the rear." The Germans obeyed meekly. One of them kept staring at Bing with wide, startled eyes. He pointed at the dog, whispering to another soldier. "Fallschirmhund, parachute dog." Word was spreading. When the prisoners were escorted away, Ross turned to Bailey. "Your dog just prevented a possible ambush." Gardner nodded. "Or a bloody stupid firefight we don't have ammunition for." Bing sat, calm once more. His work there was done. But the orchard held more than surrendered teenagers. Ross unfolded his map again, leaning against a low stone wall. "Our next objective is to clear the northern approach. Recon says the Germans are regrouping around a farmstead ahead. We need to know if the way is safe before we bring the whole battalion through." He looked directly at Bailey and Bing. "You 2 go first." Bailey swallowed. "Just us?" "You and a scout fire team," Ross clarified. "But Bing leads. If the Germans are setting up machine guns, anti-tank rifles or sniper nests, he'll smell them long before we see them." The responsibility was enormous, and potentially fatal. Bailey tightened Bing's harness. Bing stood and pulled slightly forward, ready. Gardner checked his magazine. "Let's move. Keep low." The orchard thinned as they approached the next hedgerow. Beyond it lay a narrow lane leading to a cluster of barns and stone buildings, the suspected German fallback position. Smoke drifted lazily from a chimney. A crow circled overhead. Bing took one step toward the lane, and stopped. Bailey felt the lead tighten in his hand. "What is it, lad?" The dog lowered his body into a full crouch, haunches tight, tail held rigid and low. His shoulders trembled, not in fear, but in intense focus. His breathing slowed into short, restrained puffs. The final signal. Enemy. In position, prepared. Watching the approach. A danger beyond what the eye could see. Gardner whispered, "He's warning us. They're set up ahead." Bailey's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Whatever's waiting there, it isn't small." And suddenly the dog who had dropped into Normandy was no longer just finding lost men or hidden soldiers. He was saving the battalion from walking into a firing line. Again. Bailey pressed his palm gently against Bing's flank to steady him, though the dog didn't tremble or shift. His body remained locked in that tense crouch, eyes fixed forward, muscles drawn like a bowstring. The air around them felt heavier, thicker, as if the hedgerow itself was warning them not to take another step. Gardner whispered, "He's never given that signal before." Bailey nodded slowly. "That one's from advanced training. It means the enemy isn't just close. They're set, watching, ready to shoot." Sergeant Grant swallowed hard. "Then we're staring down a prepared position." Beyond the hedgerow, the narrow lane leading to the farmstead seemed eerily quiet. Not peaceful, calculated, too still. No birds, no livestock sounds, just silence broken by the faint rattle of someone shifting weight, metal on wood, from somewhere ahead. Ross arrived behind them, crouching low. "Report!" Bailey pointed subtly at the dog. "Strong enemy scent, sir. Multiple. Bing says they're in firing positions." Ross trusted Bing now without hesitation. "What direction?" Bailey whispered. "Straight ahead. Not moving. They're waiting to catch movement on the lane." Ross carefully peered through a tiny gap in the foliage. The sun was higher now, but still low enough to cast long shadows across the farmstead. A stone barn sat at the far end, one corner partially collapsed. Its lower windows were boarded over, but unevenly, as if something or someone had made quick modifications. He narrowed his eyes. "They've got a firing slit." Gardner nodded grimly. "Looks like it. That's a perfect spot for an MG-42. Grant cursed under his breath. "They'd cut us to ribbons if we walked that lane." Bing breathed steadily, eyes never leaving the danger zone. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't move. The stillness was the warning. Ross whispered, "We need confirmation." Bailey shook his head firmly. "Sir, with respect, he already confirmed it." But Ross wasn't risking the entire battalion on assumptions. He tapped Gardner. "Take the mirror, check from the ditch." Gardner slid onto his stomach and crawled along the hedgerow, keeping as low as humanly possible. He reached a muddy drainage ditch that ran parallel to the lane and inched forward until he had enough angle to lift a small signalling mirror over the embankment. For a second, nothing happened. Then a burst of dust exploded beside the mirror as a rifle shot cracked the air. Gardner dropped instantly. "Sniper! Barn window!" Bing's ears flattened. His body compressed even lower, another trained response to gunfire at close range. Ross muttered, "Damn it, they're dug in." Gardner crawled back, heart pounding. "At least one sniper, and I swear I saw shadows behind the boards. More than one man." Grant spat quietly. "They're pre-sighted. They'll chew us up if we advance head-on." Ross rubbed his chin. "We need another way around, but if they've set up a fallback line, the whole area could be covered." Bailey glanced at Bing. The dog's head shifted sharply left, sniffing the breeze. His tail stiffened again, another alert, but different. Not danger directly ahead. Something else. "He's got something," Bailey whispered. Bing rose slowly, still cautious, and took 3 silent steps toward a break in the hedgerow to the left. He paused, looked at Bailey, then at Ross, then returned his gaze to the gap. A suggestion, a path. Not safe, safer. Bailey whispered, "He's proposing a flank." Ross didn't hesitate anymore. "If the dog says there's a route, we take it." The scout team shifted left, following Bing through the narrow opening. On the other side lay a shallow, overgrown depression, an animal trail carved by decades of cattle movement. It dipped beneath the line of sight of the farmstead's defenders. Perfect cover. Gardner whispered, "Bloody genius, this dog." Grant nodded. "Smarter than half the officers I've served with." They moved slowly. Bing led, nose forward, body low. Every few meters he paused, scenting, listening, evaluating. They crept parallel to the lane until they reached a point behind the farmstead's flank. From here, the barn's rear wall was visible, and so was the German position they could never have seen from the front. 2 German machine gunners crouched behind sandbags stacked inside a partially collapsed wall, the MG-42 barrel resting just above a narrow horizontal slit. The kill zone facing the lane was perfect, an invisible death corridor for any advancing unit. Gardner whispered, "We had no chance head-on." Bailey whispered, "He saved us again." Ross studied the position. "We're taking this from the rear, quietly." Grant grinned. "Aye, sir. About time we gave them a surprise." Ross signalled 2 men to loop wide and block any escape route. Bailey held Bing close to keep him from wandering into the line of fire. On Ross's signal, Gardner and Grant rushed the exposed flank. A stun grenade lobbed into the collapsed wall, a metallic clatter. A muffled whump, a scream. Then Ross charged in with the assault team. The firefight lasted less than 10 seconds. When the dust settled, 2 German gunners lay incapacitated, another wounded and dazed. A 4th emerged from behind a haystack with his hands up. Ross exhaled hard. "Position secured." Gardner wiped sweat from his brow. "If Bing hadn't sensed them, we'd have marched the whole battalion into an MG-42 ambush," Ross finished. Bailey knelt and stroked Bing's neck. "Good lad. That's my boy." Bing stood tall, unshaken, though his nose twitched with the lingering scent of gunpowder. Ross looked down at the dog. Really looked at him. "This dog isn't just a tracker," he said quietly. "He's a forward reconnaissance asset. Put him with the lead scouts permanently." Bailey nodded proudly. "Yes, sir." But Bing wasn't celebrating. His head turned toward the north, nostrils flaring again. Grant noticed. "What's he on now?" Bailey's voice tightened. "He smells more Germans." Ross stiffened. "Where?" Bing stepped forward, staring toward thick woodland behind the farmstead. A new threat, a larger one. Bing had saved them twice in one morning, and the day was far from over. The woods behind the farmstead were a world apart from the open orchards. Thick canopies smothered what remained of the evening light, turning everything beneath into shifting shadows and pockets of damp, earthy darkness. The air smelled of pine sap, wet leaves, and something else, human presence hidden somewhere ahead. The kind of scent that made Bing's muscles tighten before a single man sensed danger. Bailey felt the leash grow taut. The dog's steps slowed until he stood completely still at the mouth of the tree line. His tail stiffened, not raised, not lowered, horizontal, signalling intense focus. His head turned just slightly, nostrils flaring. One forepaw lifted off the ground and hovered in stillness. "Hold," Bailey whispered. Ross crouched beside them. "What's he picking up?" Bailey studied Bing's posture. Multiple humans. Close. Not attacking. They're not moving fast. Could be injured or hiding. Gardner muttered. "German stragglers?" "Maybe," Bailey replied. "But he's not warning of an ambush. He's warning of presence." Ross motioned a small team forward. "We check it. Quietly. If they're a threat, we deal with it. If they're wounded, we secure them." They entered the woods with deliberate slowness. Bing moved first, nose close to the ground, stepping around twigs and leaves with uncanny precision. The men followed through the filtered beams of dying sunlight, boots sinking softly into layered soil and old roots. Every inch of the terrain felt claustrophobic, thick trunks like pillars, branches curling low like skeletal arms. After several tense minutes, Bing stopped again. This time he crouched and glanced toward a shallow depression in the earth. Bailey followed his gaze. The light caught something pale. A face. As they descended into the hollow, the scene became clear. 3 German soldiers huddled in the dirt behind fallen roots. One clutched a heavily bandaged abdomen, another had a splinted arm fashioned from a broken rifle stock, and the last trembled violently, shock overtaking discipline. Their rifles lay discarded. They were filthy, exhausted, and defeated before any British weapon had been raised. Gardner levelled his Steen. Hände hoch! The uninjured German raised his hands immediately, whispering, Nicht schießen! Bitte! Byng didn't growl. He simply stood guard, posture relaxed but alert, confirming Bailey's interpretation. They were no threat. Ross approached slowly. Abandoned by their unit, he remarked quietly. Left to die. The medic checked them quickly. One won't last long without treatment, sir. They've been here since last night. The Germans kept glancing fearfully at Byng, whispering Fallschirmhund under their breath as though a dog falling from the sky defied nature itself. Ross gave the order. Take them prisoner, treat the wounded. We can't leave them here to rearm or die. As they secured the captives, Bailey scratched Byng's flank. Good lad, you caught all of them. Ross looked at the dog with new understanding. He just prevented a desperate group from attacking our rear or stumbling into us later tonight. But Byng wasn't finished. He lifted his head sharply, sniffed the air, and stared north toward Breville. Bailey stiffened. He smells more Germans. Ross exhaled. Then the hardest fight is still waiting. Ross gathered his men at a hedgerow overlooking a narrow lane leading into the village. Breville was vital high ground. Lose it, and the Germans could pour fire onto Ranville and Pegasus Bridge. But intelligence suggested the village was being reinforced by Fallschirmjäger, elite German paratroopers known for their discipline and lethality. Bailey crouched beside Byng at the forward edge. The dog's breathing was slow and measured, but his posture told another story. Tense, alert, coiled. His ears twitched at faint sounds no human could decipher. Ross whispered, "What's he got?" Bailey replied softly, "Something prepared ahead. He's detecting focused attention, like eyes watching us." Ross trusted that tone now. "Advance with caution. Byng leads." The dog stepped out, low to the ground, weaving through the grass. They followed the hedgerow's shadow until Byng halted abruptly at a gap between 2 trees. He didn't freeze. He backed up 1 step. Bailey's heartbeat spiked. "Sniper! Close! Ready to fire!" Ross stiffened. "Where?" Byng's eyes locked on a patch of hedgerow where the leaves were just slightly too uniform. Bailey squinted and saw it. A narrow slit cut into the foliage. A perfect sniper's blind. Gardner tested the position by flicking a handful of dirt through the gap. A rifle cracked instantly, shredding the dirt cloud. Grant hissed, "They're zeroed in on this lane. They want us walking straight into it." Ross gave a silent hand signal. Gardner, Grant, and 2 others slipped left into a shallow ditch flanking the hedge. Minutes passed as Byng remained perfectly still, holding the sniper's exact location with his gaze. Then, a muffled scuffle. A grunt. Silence. Gardner returned. "Sniper down, sir. Lone shooter." But Byng wasn't finished. He leaned forward again, nostrils flaring, then angled his head slightly to the right. Bailey whispered, "Movement. Small group. Coming to investigate." Ross motioned everyone into positions. The company melted into the hedgerow. Moments later, 5 dark figures emerged. German Fallschirmjäger, moving cautiously toward the now silent sniper position. Ross waited. Waited. Byng's ears flicked. Now. British Stens and Brens erupted in a coordinated burst. 3 Germans fell instantly. A 4th tried to dive for cover but was cut down. The last was captured before he could flee. Byng sat back down calmly. Danger passed. Ross stared at the dog, voice quiet but heavy with truth. He saved this battalion more than any man today. The night assault on Breville continued, but the route was open, the ambushes avoided, the battalion intact enough to fight its way into the village and secure the ground before dawn. Every step they took had survived because a dog had sensed what no scout could see. When the sun rose on June 7th, Byng curled beside Bailey in a shallow foxhole on the northern edge of Breville, exhausted, silent, loyal. He had parachuted into Normandy, found the lost, detected the hidden, saved the living, and changed the fate of the men who once laughed at the idea of a dog jumping into war. He was no mascot, he was a soldier, and he had earned his place in history.